You mean I have to pluck it first? That's disgusting. Oh, hello. You know, Thanksgiving is only a couple days away, and I haven't shot, bought, or got a turkey yet, and frankly, the more I read, the less I'm inclined to. But what's Thanksgiving without a roast? And if not turkey, then what? Wait a minute. Seitan has pulled my chestnut stuffing out of the fire before. Yes. Yes, that's it. Tonight, we're making a Seitan Roast! Seitan Roast used to be made from wild gluten, which was hunted in wheat fields using microfine nets made from gossamer. These days, you can find vital wheat gluten at the health food store or in the baking aisle of most grocery stores and make your own seitan. I'll show you how. I'm using a recipe by Robin Robertson as the basis for this, but I have modified it slightly. I'll place a link to the original recipe in the information bar. Preheat the oven to 350 degrees. You'll need a loaf of bread. Now, normally I save scraps of homemade bread in the freezer and use those for stuffing, but for Thanksgiving I just buy whatever's cheap. Tear up at least half of the loaf and put it into a bowl. For this I used about 3/4 of the loaf. I sometimes do this the night before, cover it loosely and let the bread go stale a little. This is not required, but I think it makes better stuffing. Don't worry if you have more bread than will fit in the bowl. It will condense significantly when you add liquid later. Set the bread aside and let's make the seitan. You'll need flour, vital wheat gluten, nutritional yeast, which you can find at the health food store along with the gluten, poultry seasoning, salt, and pepper. For the wet ingredients, you'll need tahini or peanut butter, tomato paste or ketchup, and soy sauce or similar condiment. For the stuffing, you'll need vegetable bouillon or broth, celery, an onion, and mushrooms. Into one bowl, place 2 cups of vital wheat gluten, 1/4 of a cup of flour, 1/4 cup of nutritional yeast, and 1 to 2 teaspoons of poultry seasoning. If you like, add salt and pepper to taste. I also decided to add some onion powder, which is in the original recipe and makes it a bit more savory and flavorful. Mix the dry ingredients until they are well combined. To another bowl, add 2 tablespoons of peanut butter, a tablespoon of ketchup, 1/4 of a cup of soy sauce, 1 1/4 cups of water, and about a tablespoon of olive oil. With a fork or a whisk, mix the wet ingredients well, being sure to fully incorporate the peanut butter. Now, if you don't have nutritional yeast, you can compensate for the flavor by substituting vegetable broth for the water. The same applies if you want to omit the soy sauce. In that case, simply use 1 1/2 cups of vegetable broth instead of 1 1/4 cups of water. Once everything is thoroughly mixed, add the wet ingredients to the dry ingredients and mix those together well. Be sure to scrape the sides and bottom of the bowl so that everything is thoroughly incorporated. If the mixture seems too dry, you can add a bit more liquid, but it should be a firm dough. Once the dough is mixed, place it on a clean flat surface and knead it. At first, this helps to mix it more thoroughly. Once it is uniformly mixed, however, the kneading helps to develop long gluten strands. This will give the roast a better texture. I generally knead this dough the same way I knead bread dough. You shouldn't need to put down flour for this, as the dough will stick to itself, but it shouldn't stick to the surface. After a few minutes of kneading, the texture will become uniform and like elastic. When this happens, set the dough aside for a few minutes to let it rest. Then, get out a rolling pin. Rolling out this dough will be quite difficult, and I usually have to roll it out about halfway, let it rest for a few more minutes, and then roll it out the rest of the way. This helps because as the dough rests, the gluten relaxes, and that will make it easier to stretch and roll out. You'll probably want to roll it from side to side as well, as this will keep it from getting too narrow. You want to make a long rectangle that is about 1 foot wide. It will take some work and a bit of patience, but eventually it will roll out nice and flat. You want it to be between 1/4 and 1/2 of an inch thick. Now let's make the stuffing. To that 3/4 of a loaf of bread, I added 2 cups of vegetable broth, a few tablespoons of olive oil, and mixed well. If it's too moist, I add more bread. If it's too dry, I just add water. I used about 1/3 of a medium-sized onion, diced, 2 stalks of celery, and 5 baby portobello mushrooms. The celery and the mushrooms especially will help to keep the stuffing and the roast moist. I used about 1½ to 2 teaspoons of poultry seasoning, salt, and pepper. Add anything else that you like, such as raisins if you like that weirdo, and mix well. Next, lightly oil a piece of foil. In retrospect, I really should have rolled up the roast before I placed it on the oiled foil, but it's not a huge deal. Spread the stuffing on the roast to a thickness of about ½ inch, leaving at least a 1-inch border all the way around. Roll up the roast from end to end, crimping the edges as you go. I had a bit too much stuffing at one end, so I simply removed it. Roll it up the rest of the way, placing the seam at the bottom, and squeeze the ends to seal them. There was oil on my roast, so that didn't really work so well this time. Roll it up tightly in the foil, and place it in a pan. I used a casserole dish, but you can use practically anything that's at least a couple inches deep. Pour water into the pan to a depth of at least 1 inch. If you have excess stuffing, you can cook it in its own casserole dish, at which point it technically becomes dressing. Cover it with foil, and place it into the oven next to the roast. The dressing will take between ½ an hour and 45 minutes to cook, depending on how much there is. The roast will take about 90 minutes. Once the dressing is done, remove it from the oven and place it on a cooling rack. After 90 minutes, the roast should be done. It's not necessary to check the internal temperature, but if you want to, look for a temperature of at least 160. This is reading 180, so it's definitely done. Remove it from the oven and place it on a cooling rack. Let it sit for at least 10 minutes before you slice it. Slice it with a serrated knife, as thinly or thickly as you like. ½ inch to 1 inch works best. Serve as is or with gravy. Just like meat, you'll want to eat it with a knife and fork. Well, that roast was pretty good, and since the effect of tryptophan from turkey has been greatly overstated, you'll still be just as sleepy Thanksgiving afternoon. Tune in next time for information on something else.